My name is Claire Whitman, and once I sewed a dress in the dark, just hoping my mother would look at it. She did. Then threw it in the trash. No comment. No glance. Just the sound of absence. I learned early that invisibility wasn't a feeling. It was policy, stitched into every room I walked into, printed on every invitation that didn't carry my name, signed in initials that didn't include mine. They erased me with silence, with nods, with polished manners. Not once did they say I didn't belong. They just built a world where I never showed up in the picture. But what they didn't know was that I was watching, learning, and sewing something of my own. Tonight, I won't be listed on the guest sheet, but I will be seen, not for revenge, but for truth. Because justice doesn't always wear sequins. Sometimes it wears the same old shoes and walks into the ballroom with nothing but a name they forgot to fear. If you've ever been invisible in a room you helped build, stay. This story was stitched for you. I remember that piece. Pale blue muslin, stitched with trembling hands on a secondhand machine that stalled every 4th inch. I was 15. I'd left it on the sofa, folded neatly, half hopeful she might smile or even nod. Instead, she paused, picked it up with 2 fingers, then walked to the kitchen trash bin and dropped it in without a word. It made no sound, just disappeared into the bin, like I always did. Tonight, almost a decade later, I'm in the same position, hunched over a dining chair in my Brooklyn apartment, dim lamplight casting soft shadows over a pile of old fabrics. But this time, I'm not sewing for anyone's approval. I'm repurposing a swath of discarded silk from a thrift store into a soft gray gown, needle slipping through thread with the steadiness of years. The hum of the city leaks through the window, punctuated by a distant siren and the creak of someone pacing above. On my desk lies a thick folder, an annotated policy proposal for the United Sustainable Fashion Council. I wrote it. I edited it. I approved the final version that now bears the USFC logo. The same logo now printed on a glossy event poster I found by chance this morning on a subway kiosk. Maison Lève, Grand Opening Gala, sponsored in part by the USFC. And just beneath the gold-leafed header, featuring Jenna Whitman. I blinked at it. Once. Twice. My eyes catching not just my sister's name, but the watermark of the very council I lead. It's not that I wasn't told. I approved dozens of collaborative grants every quarter, and Maison Lève's proposal, though wrapped in the usual branding fluff, had checked every box. But I hadn't noticed her name. Or maybe I had and just skimmed past it, unwilling to connect it to her. Then the envelope arrived. Cream cardstock, gold filigree, all elegance and pretense. I unfolded the invitation carefully. My name wasn't printed. Instead, it read, guest ticket, +1, kindly invited by Maison Lève. Not Claire Whitman, not president of the USFC. Just a placeholder, a seat filler. Maybe it's time to show them what they've been missing, Naomi said when I showed her. We were sitting on the floor, bowls of instant noodles in our laps. She wore her usual oversized hoodie, the one with the faint coffee stain near the hem. She's the only person who knows who I really am. To everyone else, Claire Whitman is a quiet admin, or maybe a freelancer. Someone forgettable. I wanted to shrug it off. But her words stuck. Not because they carried fire, but because of their quiet challenge. The way she said them, it didn't mean my family. It meant anyone who ever looked at me and saw less. Hours later, I found myself rummaging through my closet. There wasn't much. Just a few things I'd kept from years past. My old flats from 2016, still scuffed at the toes but wearable. A pair of glass earrings Naomi gave me when she got her first paycheck, and the dress I'd started last winter, just for fun. Recycled silk and slate gray high neckline, hand-stitched hem. I held it against me in the mirror. It wasn't bold. It wasn't flashy. But it was mine. I didn't think about what Jenna would wear, or how my mother would react. I didn't plan to speak or pose or take up space. I only wanted to stand in that ballroom and see if they'd even notice I was there. As I slipped the dress over my head, smoothing it over my hips, my reflection surprised me. I didn't look like an assistant or a forgotten daughter. I looked like someone who had something to say, even if she never said a word. The ballroom was in Midtown. I walked the last 2 blocks in low heels, clutching my tiny purse like armor. People passed by in designer gowns, sharp tuxedos, laughter tumbling from lips that knew they belonged here. I stepped through the revolving door. Gold chandeliers bathed the lobby in a warm, honeyed light. The air smelled of champagne and rosewater. I walked toward the entry line where a man in a black tuxedo checked names on a digital tablet. He looked up, paused, then his eyes widened ever so slightly. I walked into the ballroom, and the first person to stop me was the person who kept the guest list. I'm not on the list, but there's a line in the contract I signed. The man at the door blinked twice before tapping his tablet. The moment stretched long enough for me to hear the clink of crystal from inside the ballroom, laughter spilling like champagne onto polished marble. Then he nodded once, slowly, and stepped aside. Right this way, Ms. Claire. No last name, no title, just the ghost of acknowledgement. The ballroom at the Grand Square Hotel was dressed in its finest. Red velvet draped every column. Gold light glimmered from chandeliers that probably cost more than my apartment's annual rent. Waiters floated like swans, trays balanced with champagne flutes and tiny culinary sculptures. At the center, like a sun orbited by admirers, stood Jenna, my sister. Her gown shimmered like molten glass, hair swept into something engineered rather than styled. Every gesture, every tilt of her chin, calculated. I didn't expect warmth, but I didn't expect erasure. There was no place card for me, no chair, not even a nod from anyone I recognized. I stood near the back wall, feet aching already, fingertips brushing the seam of my dress for reassurance. Margaret moved through the crowd with the grace of someone born under spotlights. She reached Jenna and leaned in, unaware, or uncaring, that I stood close enough to hear. "You should keep her far away from the partnership table," she whispered with a smile. "It ruins the whole thing." I didn't flinch, but something cold settled beneath my ribs. Jenna didn't look at her. She looked directly at me. "You still have those shoes from that year?" she said, loud enough to carry. Very sustainable. The people around her chuckled politely, the way they might at a harmless family joke. My cheeks warmed, but I said nothing. I just tightened my grip on the stem of the untouched champagne flute in my hand. From behind, Naomi leaned in, voice low. "You can leave, or stand here and watch them fall." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I wasn't here for retribution. I wasn't even sure why I was here. But standing in that crowd, invisible yet so very present, I remembered something I'd written once in the margins of a grant application. Justice doesn't need sequins. It needs truth. The orchestra shifted to a softer tune. A man in a silver suit stepped onto the stage. The crowd quieted. A voice announced, "Please welcome Mr. Julien Dubois, CEO of Maison Lève." Applause, flashes of phone cameras. Julien raised his hands to silence them, his French accent thick yet clear. "Tonight," he said, "we celebrate more than style. We celebrate the future of fashion, ethical, sustainable, and bold." Margaret beamed. Jenna took a modest step forward, ready. Julien smiled. "And none of this would be possible without our partnership with the United Sustainable Fashion Council, the one who signed off not only on funding, but on the philosophy that guided this launch." A murmur stirred. Julien turned, gestured toward the crowd. His eyes found mine. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the visionary behind this ethical partnership, Madam President of USFC, Claire Whitman." Everything stopped. The wine glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered softly on the floor. The orchestra stilled mid-note. Jenna's smile froze. Margaret blinked, lips parted. I didn't speak. I didn't bow. I just stepped forward. No apologies, no explanations, no vengeance. And as I walked, slowly, through the silence they'd built around me for years, I passed the empty table they hadn't reserved in my name, the eyes that once looked past me now glued to every step I took. Claire just walks over, not saying a word. I walked through the flashbulbs not for revenge, but to let them know I was there the whole time. Cameras chased me down the marbled hallway like shadows that had learned to scream. My name, whispered yesterday, was now being flung into microphones, headlines, and trending hashtags. Claire Whitman, corrupt president, family favoritism at USFC grand opening. I didn't flinch until I saw his face, my father standing near the coat room. His eyes met mine briefly, then slid past, as if looking through an old painting he'd once admired, now faded. I didn't stop. I didn't ask for anything. I just kept walking through the flashbulbs. By Monday morning, the fluorescent lights of the USFC boardroom replaced the ballroom's chandeliers. Everything was sharp now. White walls, steel chairs, cold voices. Bradley Voss adjusted his tie and cleared his throat like a conductor about to start an overture. There's been concern, he said, not looking at me. The press is questioning the integrity of our endorsement process. You, Claire, signed the partnership with Maison Lev, while your sister is on the campaign visuals? She was never involved in the application, I replied. Julian and I... Bradley cut me off. Public perception is louder than proof. I looked around the table. No one met my eyes. Not even Julian, whose name was being floated as a potential interim advisor. His chair remained empty. We're asking you, Bradley continued, to step down temporarily until this is resolved. It was not a request. By the time I left, the office was swarmed. I kept my face down, coat collar turned up. They shouted things. Favoritism, nepotism, fraud, as if I was guilty of wearing my last name too close to my chest. Naomi waited at the bottom of the stairs, her arms crossed and eyes burning. They turned faster than I expected, she said. You need sleep? I wanted to answer, but there were no words. My voice was somewhere between disbelief and rage, lodged under my ribs, refusing to come out. Back at the apartment, I collapsed onto the couch, still in my dress from the event, makeup smudged, hair undone. I stared at the cracked ceiling like it might give me back a reason to keep breathing. For the first time in a decade, I thought about quitting. Naomi sat beside me. She didn't speak for a long time, just scrolled through something on her phone with laser focus. Claire, she finally whispered. You were set up. I turned my head, barely registering her voice. She held the phone in front of me. The screen showed a grainy recording, an internal meeting I hadn't attended. Bradley's voice was unmistakable. She's too close. She'll clean up the entire funding structure. We take her down before she figures out the grants linked to that 1998 file. Silence. He didn't just betray you, Naomi said, quiet but sharp. He betrayed thousands of people depending on this council to stay honest. I stared at the phone. My fingers felt like stone, but they moved, slowly, then with purpose. I sat up, walked to my desk, opened my laptop. The screen blinked awake. I pulled up an old file directory I hadn't touched in years. Buried among dusty folders was one that had haunted me since my first week on the board. Transparency_1998.zip. I double-clicked. Claire opens her computer. Type in the title, Transparency_1998.zip, and presses enter. I tried to keep the family honor, but some legacies are not worth protecting. The words echoed in my head as I stared at the still image on my laptop. A factory floor, broken glass, mangled fabric, and limbs that didn't belong to mannequins. Dated July 4th, 1998. Bangladesh. There was no mistaking the letterhead. Whitman and Rowe Industries, my father's company, my family name. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just breathed once as if air might steady me and whispered, "We built our name on this." Naomi and I sat in the corner of a small coffee shop in Brooklyn, our table covered with printed financial statements, death certificates, and copies of USFC minutes from that era. She pointed to a signature that recurred across a dozen contracts. "Bradley was involved back then," she said. "Not as a board member, but as an expediter. He covered tracks. This isn't new." A low hum of jazz filtered through the speakers. People sipped lattes around us, unaware that the foundation of an entire industry trembled on our table. Later that afternoon, we stepped through the creaking door of an abandoned design studio in Queens. The air smelled like chalk dust and old thread. 5 young USFC members sat in a circle, their eyes wary but burning with curiosity. I stood, folder in hand. "I know what you've heard," I began, "and some of it might be true. I approved the Maison Lev grant. My sister's face is in their campaign, but I didn't break the code. I've been trying to fix what was broken long before I ever arrived." I passed the folder to Mathoni, the youngest of them, barely 22, brilliant, fierce, with a tattoo of a broken loom on her wrist. She opened it. Inside, photographs of the 1998 factory collapse, official financial transfers linking the Whitman company to offshore production sites with no oversight, emails confirming Bradley's connections to those subsidiaries. "It's not just about me," I said. "This is our moment to decide who we are. If we want to wear justice on our sleeves, we need to sew it into our seams." Mathoni didn't hesitate. She reached into her bag, pulled out a pen, and signed the first line of what we titled the Ethical Thread Proposal. 4 others followed. That evening, Naomi arrived with something else. Something colder. She laid a spreadsheet across the counter of my apartment. "He funneled it through a development grant, then filtered it through dummy contractors." "Bradley?" I asked, though I already knew. She nodded. "We follow the money, we burn down the lie." But before I could do anything, I needed to go somewhere I had avoided for years. My parents' brownstone stood like a monument to pretense. Inside, it was quiet. Margaret wasn't home. My father was. He sat in the study, the same chair he always used, back straight, scotch untouched. I dropped the file on his lap. His eyes flicked over the pages. Then to me. "I didn't know how to stop it," he said at last. One report after another. I tried to fix it quietly. "But Bradley, he had too much leverage. And your mother, she wanted it buried." "And you let her," I replied. His shoulders sank. "I didn't know how to fix it." "I know," I said, not unkindly. "But the first thing I need is for you to stop hiding." He didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. Behind me, the door creaked. Naomi stepped in, her expression unreadable. She walked to the desk and placed a printout beside the scotch. The subject line read, "Do what's best or else, BV," and underneath it, the full email chain, Bradley threatening a sitting member of the board 2 days before the vote. No one said a word, but the tide had already turned. I used to think that being nice was enough. But no, sometimes you have to shout the truth in a room where no one wants to hear. The USFC main hall had never been this crowded. Rows of velvet chairs lined the marble floor, facing a stage now draped in plain white. No logos, no sponsors, just a banner that read, "Emergency Session, Ethics and Transparency." Cameras blinked red. Reporters whispered behind notepads. My name buzzed across the room like static, layered with uncertainty, doubt, anticipation. I took the stage without a script, without armor. Just a single USB drive in my pocket and Naomi standing to the side like a silent pillar. Margaret sat in the 3rd row, spine rigid. Jenna beside her, expression unreadable behind Dior sunglasses she wore indoors. Julian stood near the board, his first public appearance since the Maison Lev launch. His gaze didn't waver. Bradley sat dead center, arms folded, flanked by 2 allies who already looked uncomfortable. I took a breath. "I'm not here to retaliate," I began. "I'm here to name the dead who have gone unnamed." A stillness settled. I clicked the remote. The screen behind me flickered to life. A grainy image, bodies in rubble, faded press clippings in Bengali, a ledger of hidden payments from 1998, all signed with initials familiar to every person in that room. "You built your profits on this," I said, voice calm but slicing. "You called it development. You called it progress. But for 34 workers, it was the last paycheck they never got to cash." Bradley shifted. I didn't stop. "And when I joined this council, I thought silence meant wisdom. My mother once told me that silence keeps dignity. But no, silence is conspiracy." A soft murmur. I clicked again. A video clip played. Bradley, in a private boardroom, saying into a glass of whiskey, "We need puppets, not ethicists. Keep the idealists out of the numbers." Someone gasped. Margaret turned pale. I turned to the crowd. "We don't need puppets. We need policies." So today, I submit the Ethical Thread Initiative, an industry-wide code of transparency, traceability, and accountability. I held up the document. No more offshore lies. No more ghost factories. No more erasing the people who make what we wear. I turned slightly. "Julian?" He stepped forward. "Maison Lev signs the pledge, today," he said clearly. "And we call on every brand in this room to follow." The room rippled. One by one, board members stood. First Mathoni, then 3 others, then nearly all. Bradley stood too, but not in agreement. "Do you think you can teach the whole industry?" He barked. This righteousness won't survive the market." I stared at him. "I don't teach," I said. I remind them. They used to have a conscience. For a moment, no one moved. Then Chairwoman Tanaka spoke. "Motion to terminate Bradley Voss as Ethics Oversight Lead, effective immediately." All in favor? Hands rose. Bradley's didn't, but that no longer mattered. I stepped down from the stage, pulse quiet but clear. Reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Naomi pressed her phone to my ear and whispered, "A newspaper called you the ethical storm." I smiled, eyes locked ahead. The storm hasn't started yet. They used to call me the wrinkle on the family image. Now that image needs me to keep it from tearing any further. The lights were softer than I expected. Not the harsh glare of press events or the manic shimmer of fashion shows. Just a gentle golden hue cast across the marble stage of the Grand Palais in Paris, where the Global Sustainable Fashion Conference was in its final session. My heels didn't click when I stepped forward. The carpet beneath my feet muffled sound, like the universe giving space for the words I'd waited my whole life to say. "I'm Claire Whitman," I said into the microphone, "president of the USFC, lead drafter of the Ethical Thread Initiative, and until recently, a nobody in my own family." A ripple of quiet laughter. I let it hang. "But this isn't a story about me. It's about the hands we never see, the names we never ask. It's about rethreading a world that's come undone." Behind me, the screen displayed 42 logos, brands that had signed on. Below them, the names of 7 nations who had formally agreed to audit their textile supply chains. This wasn't just a speech. It was the start of something that would outlive me. A quiet stir in the wings. I paused. A woman stepped out from stage right, dressed simply in a linen tunic, her hair pulled back. She held a square of white cloth embroidered with gold thread. Her name was Rena, from Dhaka. "You gave us a name," she said as she handed it to me. Not just a number on a tag. I accepted it with both hands. The auditorium, full of CEOs and designers and students, rose in silent respect. Later, as I walked off stage, I saw Naomi waiting just beyond the curtain. Her eyes were glassy, but her voice was steady. "The last ally is still by your side," she whispered. I nodded. We flew back that night. Paris faded into cloud cover, and Brooklyn welcomed me with a late autumn chill. My old apartment had changed, barely recognizable. Where there once was chipped tile and a squeaky heater, now stood a warm, bustling space. Justice threads. Teenagers in upcycled denim sat at long tables, working on sewing machines. A young man printed designs on t-shirts that read, "Dignity has no discount." I wasn't teaching. I was simply present. A week later, the bell rang at the front door. I opened it and found Jenna. No makeup, no entourage, just her and a worn portfolio in her arms. She didn't ask to come in. She just stepped forward and held out a plastic folder. Inside was a design sketch. Mine. From college. The one she threw away when I left it on the kitchen counter. She handed me a small silver badge. Honorary advisor, ethical thread, it read. I stared at it, then at her. "I'm not good at forgiving," I said. "But I'm good at starting over. If you dare." She smiled. Tired. Honest. "I'll try." That evening, I stepped onto the narrow balcony outside my apartment. Below, dozens of design students were setting up folding tables, unrolling bolts of cloth, arranging secondhand mannequins. A long banner stretched between two lampposts fluttered in the wind. Ethics is not a trend. It's a legacy. I leaned forward into the breeze. This was never about revenge. It was about being seen and staying seen. Beneath the soft lights of Paris and the quiet resolve of Brooklyn, a forgotten name became the standard for something far greater. What began as a silent exile ended in a thunderclap of truth, one that shook boardrooms, unseated the complicit, and rewrote the rules stitched in greed. Justice, though delayed, arrived not with vengeance, but with clarity. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime. And sometimes it only takes one steady voice to unravel decades of silence.